Most people believe power comes from force, from armies marching, from cities burning, from borders expanding. But history tells a quieter story. The most durable power does not conquer land, it controls movement, because when you control movement, you control survival. You decide who eats, who trades, who grows rich, and who collapses quietly, long before central banks, long before corporations, long before modern finance. One city discovered this secret: Venice. Venice should not have existed. It had no farmland, no mines, no empire behind it. It was built on swampy islands in a shallow lagoon, no natural defenses, no strategic depth. By every traditional rule of power, Venice should have been irrelevant. Instead, it became one of the richest and most influential forces in the world. Not by conquering territory, but by positioning itself between everyone else, Venice sat at a geographic hinge point. To the east were the riches of Asia, silk, spices, porcelain, precious stones. To the south were African gold roots. To the north were European markets desperate for supply. And Venice stood in the middle. At first, Venetian merchants were simple middlemen. They bought goods cheaply in the east, they sold them dearly in the west, but middlemen are easy to replace. So Venice evolved. It stopped acting like a merchant and started acting like a gatekeeper. Venice realized something crucial. Trade routes are not neutral paths. They are choke points, and choke points create power. Instead of racing competitors, Venice slowed them down. Instead of flooding markets, Venice rationed access. Goods did not move freely through Venice. They waited. They were stored, inspected, taxed, repackaged. Time became a weapon. When spices arrived late, prices spiked. When Venice released supply slowly, profits soared. And Venice decided when that release happened. This was not just merchant behavior, it was state strategy. Venice built one of the earliest systems where commerce and government merged. Merchants did not operate independently. They were licensed, tracked, regulated. The state decided which ships sailed, which routes they used, which cargo they carried. Venice even standardized contracts. If you wanted protection, insurance, or credit, you signed Venetian terms, and those terms favored Venice. The city created maritime insurance systems centuries ahead of others. If your ship sank, Venice compensated you, but only if you followed their rules, routes, ports, schedules. Risk itself became a tool of control. And then Venice went further. It built the arsenal, a massive state-owned shipyard unlike anything the world had seen. The arsenal could produce ships at an industrial pace, not just warships. Merchant vessels, escort fleets, supply ships. Trade and military power fused into one system. If Venice wanted peace, ships escorted trade. If Venice wanted pressure, ships disappeared. And pressure worked. European kingdoms became dependent, not because Venice ruled them, but because Venice fed them. Grain from the Black Sea passed through Venetian channels. Spices that preserved food passed through Venetian hands. Luxury goods that defined status passed through Venetian markets. If Venice closed a route, prices rose. If Venice tightened credit, merchants failed. If Venice delayed shipments, entire cities felt it. This was financial power before the word existed. Invisible, technical, deniable. Kings saw trade. They did not see dependency. But dependency is stronger than occupation. Venice built one of the earliest systems where commerce and government merged. Merchants did not operate independently. They were licensed, tracked, regulated. The state decided which ships sailed, which routes they used, which cargo they carried. Venice even standardized contracts. If you wanted protection, insurance, or credit, you signed Venetian terms, and those terms favored Venice. The city created maritime insurance systems centuries ahead of others. If your ship sank, Venice compensated you, but only if you followed their rules, routes, ports, schedules. Risk itself became a tool of control. And then Venice went further. It built the arsenal, a massive state-owned shipyard unlike anything the world had seen. The arsenal could produce ships at an industrial pace, not just warships. Merchant vessels, escort fleets, supply ships. Trade and military power fused into one system. If Venice wanted peace, ships escorted trade. If Venice wanted pressure, ships disappeared. And pressure worked. European kingdoms became dependent, not because Venice ruled them, but because Venice fed them. Grain from the Black Sea passed through Venetian channels. Spices that preserved food passed through Venetian hands. Luxury goods that defined status passed through Venetian markets. If Venice closed a route, prices rose. If Venice tightened credit, merchants failed. If Venice delayed shipments, entire cities felt it. This was financial power before the word existed. Invisible, technical, deniable. Kings saw trade. They did not see dependency. But dependency is stronger than occupation. Venice did not dominate trade by being faster. It dominated trade by making competitors fragile. Because Venice understood something most powers never see. If you want to defeat an enemy, do not attack their army. Attack their cash flow. Venice rarely fought large wars for territory. Instead, it fought wars of access. If a rival city tried to bypass Venetian routes, Venice responded quietly. Insurance premiums increased, loans dried up, ports closed. Suddenly, merchants could not move goods safely, ships became too risky to sail, and trade collapsed without a single battle. This was not coincidence. Venice used law as a weapon. Venetian courts standardized commercial law centuries before most of Europe. Contracts were enforceable. Disputes were resolved quickly. Debts were honored. But only inside the Venetian system. If you operate outside Venetian rules, you had no legal protection. That meant no serious merchant trusted you, no insurer covered you, no lender financed you. So Venice created a simple choice: trade inside the system and survive. Trade outside and fail. Rival ports tried to compete. Genoa, Pisa, Ragusa. They had ships, they had sailors, they even had wealth. But they lacked what Venice had built: a complete financial ecosystem. Venice controlled shipping schedules, it controlled storage facilities, it controlled credit markets, and it controlled dispute resolution. Trade was no longer about goods, it was about infrastructure. And Venice owned the infrastructure. One of the most powerful tools Venice used was delayed settlement. Merchants often paid weeks or months after goods were delivered. That delay meant merchants depended on Venetian credit to stay alive. Miss a payment, your reputation collapsed. Once reputation collapsed, no one traded with you. Venice did not blacklist merchants publicly, it just stopped answering letters. And silence was enough. Entire trading families vanished this way, not executed, not exiled, just quietly excluded. Venice also perfected monopolies. Not crude monopolies enforced by force, but functional monopolies enforced by logistics. If spices passed through Venetian warehouses, Venice controlled release. If Venice controlled release, Venice controlled price. This allowed Venice to fund itself without taxing citizens heavily. Trade paid for the state. The state protected trade. A self-reinforcing loop. And this loop made Venice stable for centuries. While kingdoms rose and fell, Venice adapted. When land routes became dangerous, Venice expanded maritime trade. When rivals grew aggressive, Venice tightened contracts. When wars disrupted supply, Venice raised prices. And here's the critical point. Venice did not think in years, it thought in decades. Policies were designed for long-term leverage, not short-term victories. That mindset separated Venice from feudal powers. Kings wanted tribute. Venice wanted systems. And systems outlive rulers. By the time European monarchs realized what Venice had done, they began copying it. Not with swords, but with banks, with stock exchanges, with state debt. Venice proved that power does not need flags. It needs control over trust. Trust in contracts. Trust in delivery. Trust in payment. Once trust is centralized, power follows automatically. This is why Venice terrified its rivals. You could not fight it directly. There was no battlefield, no capital to sack. The battlefield was paperwork, and paperwork always favored Venice. But Venice was not the final form. It was a prototype, a blueprint, one that would later be refined by families, banks, and empires far larger than Venice itself. And that is where this story goes next. Venice did not disappear because its system failed. It disappeared because its system was copied. That is the final irony of power. The most effective systems do not fall by force. They fall by imitation. Once others understand the blueprint, the advantage disappears. And Venice's blueprint spread fast, first to banking families, then to rising states, then to empires that learned how to weaponize finance on a scale Venice could never reach. The Medici did it with banking. The Dutch did it with corporations. The British did it with debt. But the core logic never changed. Control the roots, control the contracts, control the credit. Everything else follows. Venice showed the world that armies are expensive, finance is efficient. An army needs food, pay, loyalty. A financial system only needs trust, and trust can be engineered. Venice engineered trust through law, through predictable contracts, through reliable enforcement, through systems that worked even when rulers changed. That is the real reason Venice lasted so long. It removed emotion from power. Kings ruled by personality. Venice ruled by process, and process scales. This is why modern power looks so familiar. Global shipping lanes, insurance markets, clearinghouses, centralized legal standards. These are not modern inventions. They are refinements of Venetian logic. Even today, when a shipment is delayed, a loan is frozen, or an insurance policy is revoked, someone feels the pressure. Not because a soldier arrived, but because a system closed its doors. This is the quiet side of power, the side most people never see. Venice understood something that still defines the world today. If you control how value moves, you do not need to control people directly. They will organize themselves around your system. They will comply because survival depends on it. Venice did not force Europe into submission. Europe opted in, merchants signed contracts, kings accepted loans, cities relied on shipments, and dependency became normal. By the time Venice declined, the idea had already escaped. Finance had become the new battlefield, trade had become the new weapon, and power no longer needed borders. That is why Venice matters. Not because it was rich, but because it changed how power works. Once power becomes systemic, it does not need to announce itself. It simply operates. And those who understand the system rise. Those who do not fall quietly. This channel exists to uncover those systems, not just in Venice, but across history, across empires, across time. If you want to understand how money quietly shapes the world, how systems replace rulers, and how power really works beneath the surface, then you're in the right place. Subscribe, not for news, not for opinions, but to learn how history's hidden financial systems still shape your life today.